Greetings, everyone. I hope that you are well. Don't forget, down in the description box, if you would like to check the Back to Ashes and Phoenix Fire Narrations merch that will be available. Also, if you like what you are hearing, you can buy me a coffee for appreciation as much as I appreciate you. If you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes for only $1.99 a month, you can hit the join button on the profile. Perks include getting videos a day early, getting a special shout out at the beginning of every video, top priority replies in the comment section, and much more. Now, let's get you that dose of vocal melatonin that you always crave. Sit back, relax, or tuck in and get warm, and let's get started with these true Let's Not Meet stories. I used to be a process server, and I have a lot of interesting stories from that job. I have a couple that really scared me. This is one of those stories that really scared me. This experience helped confirm that I should always trust my gut. I went to an apartment building to serve someone who lived there. When I was walking up to the building, there was an older man sitting on a bench right by the front door. He had a cane next to him. He was friendly and said hello. I said hello back, and initially my guard was down, so I started to have small talk with him. I attempted to open the front door, but it ended up being locked. I explained to the man that I am a process server, so I was attempting to give some papers to someone that lives in the building. He started to go on about how he has a daughter my age and that he wouldn't be comfortable with her being a process server because it wasn't a safe job. He also said it must be extra unsafe for me because I am so small. I'm 5'2", and at the time, I was 110 pounds. I instantly started to feel like something was off. I also thought maybe I was being overdramatic because this is just an older man who has to use a cane. I felt like it was almost rude to be cautious of someone like that. I still had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let this deter me from that, so I asked the man if he was willing to let me into the apartment building. He said he would. It seemed to take him some effort to stand up and walk towards the door with his cane, so I started to feel like I had been overreacting. The man opened the door for me, and I walked into the building. I was about to go up the stairs, but the man insisted I take the elevator. I started to feel very uneasy, but for some reason, I agreed to take the elevator anyways. I thought the man would leave me alone if I took his suggestion. I started to walk over to the elevator, and he followed me. He continued to talk to me. He asked me about my job and life. I was trying to be vague. When I got onto the elevator, the man also got onto the elevator. At this point, I froze because I didn't understand why he had followed me. The man was standing closer to the back wall of the elevator, and I was standing closer to the door. I didn't want to make eye contact with him in that enclosed space alone. But I was watching him in the reflection of the shiny metal elevator door. I asked him why he got on the elevator with me, and he said that he was watching out for me. When the man said this, I could clearly see that his head was facing me, and it moved down, starting at the floor where my feet were, and it moved up slowly, like he was looking at my body from bottom to top. I started to feel claustrophobic, and that I needed to get off that elevator now. The elevator door opened, and I practically jumped out. I told the man that he needed to stay there because I wanted to respect the privacy of the person I was serving papers to. I then told the man to have a nice day because I felt like that was what I needed to say at the time to end the conversation, without him trying to continue the conversation. The man just nodded at me. I get off the elevator and begin walking down the hallway looking for the right apartment number that it listed on the documents that are in my hands. I continue walking, and I feel the sensation like I'm being watched, but I don't turn around because I'm too afraid that I will see the man standing there. I end up having to walk around the corner and further down the hallway. The feeling of being watched goes away, and I know it is because there is now a wall between me and whoever's eyes I could feel were watching my back. I get to the right apartment and knock on the door. There is no answer. I knock again, but this time much louder. Then I wait about 30 seconds and give the door 4 sturdy knocks before waiting patiently. I couldn't hear anyone inside the apartment. No TV, no pets, no microwave running, just nothing. I fully believe the person is not home. I accept defeat. I'm a little annoyed that I went through all of this just to arrive at this person's apartment, but they aren't even home. I start to walk back the way I came from. I turned around the corner of the hallway, and what comes into view makes my stomach sink. That man was standing right there. One hand on his cane, and one hand hovering in front of the elevator button. I keep walking while a bunch of different thoughts are running through my head. When I start to approach the elevator, the man asks, "How did it go?" I answered simply, "They weren't home." The man says, "I've been waiting for you here." There was something about how the man said this. I knew that I shouldn't go on the elevator with this man again. I basically did a drive-by and started to fast walk past him. I told him, "Have a nice day, I'm in a hurry." I didn't wait for him to reply and continued to move quickly past the elevator and towards the staircase. Once I reached the stairs, I'm not sure why, but I started running down them. Once I got down one case of stairs, I heard a loud, "Wait!" I looked back once and I could see the man up on top of the staircase, carrying his cane, and he began to run down the stairs after me. He wasn't using his cane at all to descend down the stairs, and he was moving way faster than he had previously. I turned away and ran as fast as I could down the stairs without falling down. I started to jump down 2 stairs at a time. I knew that he was close behind me because I could hear his loud feet as he was running down behind me. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and I almost ran into another resident of the building. I apologized and then felt panic when I realized the man was probably right behind me. I looked behind me and the man was using his cane again to get down the last few steps. I looked back at the other building resident and they had a puzzled look on their face. I mumbled, "Have a nice day," and booked it out of the apartment building and straight to my car. I didn't check to see if the man was following me, but something in my gut told me that the other resident being present had helped me. When I reached my car, I practically jumped into it. I slammed my car door and hit lock right away. I started my car and pulled out of the lock quickly. The parking lot required me to drive past the front door of the apartment building. I looked over to see if there was any sign of that man, and there he was. He had stepped outside the front door and was standing there, leaning on his cane and smiling at me driving by. He then gave me a slow wave. I don't know why, but I gave a tight-lipped smile. I still felt like I had to be nice, even though something obviously really messed up had just happened. But at least I was in my locked car, driving away, and he had no way of catching up to me. To that old crazy man in that apartment complex, I hope we never meet again. Since it's been a while, I can now talk about this encounter that happened a few months ago that still creeps me out. I live in an apartment building in a major city, and while it's mostly safe, there's the occasional gunshots. This night was one of those nights. It was about 2:30 a.m. on a weekend night when I was watching TV in my room. Suddenly, I heard two large bangs coming from my parking garage, which is open to the alley. Anyone can walk right in. I heard a car alarm go off, and I thought, son of a bleep, because I had experienced theft before. I decided to wait about 30 minutes before I thought it was safe to check it out. It was about 3 a.m. at this point, and when I arrived downstairs in the garage, no one was around. But there was still something in the air that felt off to me. My car ended up being fine, and I wasn't sure whose car was going off originally. As I was about to head back inside, I heard some scuffling somewhere to my right in the corner of the garage. When I looked over, I just barely noticed a man crouching and moving behind the row of cars. Chills went down my spine, and I booked it inside back up to my apartment. I guess the creepiest part to me is that he was probably there the entire time. I'm glad I got the hell out of there before I found out what he was up to. To the creepy man in the garage, I hope you get caught and that I never see you again. Yesterday, as normal, I ordered an Uber to work. I saw that the driver I was connected with was someone I'd ridden with at least one other time, but not regularly. There's a road a little northeast of me that connects right up to the hospital I work at. And at one point during the ride to work, I had sent my mom a quick text, then looked up and had no idea where we were. I checked the map and saw we were in a neighborhood a little north of the road that connects to the hospital, when there was no reason for us to have left the road once we'd gotten onto it. I asked my driver, who had been talking on the phone the whole ride, where we were. Instead of answering me, he started driving faster until we were out of that neighborhood and back on the road to the hospital. Honestly, when I looked up from my phone and couldn't recognize my surroundings, it's not an idea of town I spend much time in, and it was really dark, as it was about 6:50 p.m. It felt like a scene from a horror movie where the antagonist kidnaps someone and brings them somewhere they don't recognize. I honestly was scared to get into my Uber to work tonight, but figured I'd share my location with a couple of people for safety. Was I overreacting by being afraid and reporting him? Here's an update to this situation. I got the following email from Uber. It should be noted that my ride was about $7. We're sorry to hear that your driver was unprofessional and did not follow the in-app navigation information during this trip. What you described does not sound like the Uber experience we wish for our customers. It is important that such drivers' behavior is notified, as our intention is to only connect with the best drivers. I've added a $5 credit in Uber Cash to your account that can be used on a future ride or Uber Eats order. We've also let our systems know not to match you with this driver again. If you haven't already, please rate and leave feedback for your driver. By sharing, you're helping to provide useful information to your drivers. Drivers whose ratings are significantly below average may also permanently lose access to the driver app. To that scary Uber driver, I really hope you lose your job, as I did not know your intentions, and I seriously hope we never meet again. This happened late at night. I went to the store to get a drink. There was a group of guys outside the door. At one point, it sounded like they were fighting, and I wondered whether it was even worth it to get out of the car. I should have trusted my gut. Anyway, I got out and bought a drink. And then I noticed the group of guys move their car from right in front of the store all the way to the other side of the parking lot, conveniently right next to mine. And the parking lot was basically empty, so they clearly did this intentionally. I noticed this, so I asked the cashier if I could just hang out in the store for a minute, and she shrugged and said, yeah, sure. Well, apparently, even doing that was enough to set them off. One of the guys comes running up and slams open the door. He goes, "What? You afraid to go to your car or something? You think I want you? I don't want you, you bee." I tried to play it off like I didn't know what he was talking about, but he just talked over me, mocking me by saying, "Yeah, blah, 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 blah. I don't give an F. I don't want you, dumb bee. Go ahead now. Go to your car. I'm in here so you don't have anything to worry about, right? But you better go quick. Now I'm coming for you." I was pretty freaked out at this point. Nobody else in the store said anything. I really didn't want to go to my car while the other guy still parked right next to me. But I weighed my options, and I figured that since the most aggressive one was now inside the store with me, actively threatening me, and clearly nobody else was going to come to my aid or do anything to help, that this was now my best option. So, I just walked out the door and walked calmly but swiftly to my car. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me run. I was listening for the bell on the shop's door the entire walk, ignoring the jeers from the other guys in the car next to me. I got in my car and scrambled to lock the doors, then just left as fast as I could. They actually tried to follow me out of the parking lot at first, but thankfully I lost them. Simply being cautious was enough to make that guy feel the need to threaten me. And you know what? I was probably right to be cautious. They moved their car to park right next to me in an otherwise empty parking lot, and then clearly were paying such close attention to me that they saw I was waiting in the store from all the way across the lot. Clearly, they were watching me. All I do is try to stay out of other people's way and not cause issues and keep myself safe. But apparently, even that is offensive. I'm just glad nothing worse happened. To the douchebag in the store and the other guys parked by my car, I hope I never see you again. I was in a restaurant with my family for dinner. Everything was going normally, when all of a sudden a guy with many supermarket bags came in and started to ask for money because he wanted to buy cigarettes. My dad then spoke up and said, "Why do you need money to buy cigarettes if you clearly just got out of the supermarket?" Then he started saying that he was shaking and that he needed a cigarette. My dad said he didn't have the money. He really didn't. He just had a credit card. Then, out of nowhere, he started saying that because we didn't have money, he would pay for dinner for us, even with my father saying that this wasn't necessary. He continued to say the same thing. At some point, he even took money out of his pocket and put it on the table, saying that we didn't have any money and just pretended to be rich, like he was angry or something. My dad became nervous and called the waiter. He said to the waiter that he just wanted to help. He stayed a little while longer and then he went away. To this day, I'm trying to understand what happened. Was it a prank? Maybe he was high? I'm not expecting to really know what happened. I just want to know if anyone has any idea of what could it be, or if someone has had a similar experience happen to them. If anyone knows or has any sort of suggestions, please, I'm all ears. And to the man that came in to the restaurant, I hope you get help and that we never meet again. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at 2 a.m., so I had always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house, because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms, you could look down over the banister to see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked at the clock, and it was around 2:30 a.m. My brother told me that there were 2 men at our front door. Of course, now this is a real wake-up call. We quietly walked out of my room and peeked over to look down at the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, but he told me there were 2 guys who had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure they weren't at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it is an indirect view of the door. My brother is right behind me as we head over to where my parents are, whispering to try and find out what is going on. My parents had woken up to our dog barking and had come to see these 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, we see the men return and then begin knocking again, despite the fact that no one had come to the door and our dog is still actively barking. The fact that they were, at this time, in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards and still knocking while the dog was barking made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walk away, and we all shuffle across the kitchen into the family room to peek out of the windows into our driveway, which is lit up by our outside light. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately, the question was, where did the guys go? They weren't in their car, and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we figured out the answer when the handles on our back French doors started jiggling. They were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which enters the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying, "David," as pure terror overwhelmed her. At this point, 2 things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone, called the police, and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared again, only to return to their knocking at the front. However, at this point, several minutes had gone by, and suddenly we saw the police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and front yard, the two men bolted away, attempting to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of our view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't, and he was immediately tased and fell on the ground. Some of the officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad and I as we came out to the front. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appears both of them were drunk and or high, as the one who hid had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, the whole experience was not fun. So, random men at our door in the middle of the night. I hope we never meet again. When I was 23, I lived in Colorado Springs over the summer. I had a job delivering pizza in the evenings and late into the night. One late night, on my way home from work, I pulled up to a stoplight and another car pulled up next to me. We were the only two cars on our side of the road, and in my peripheral, I could see the driver waving his hands. I looked over, and the driver, a seemingly well-dressed, middle-aged man in a decent car, was motioning me to roll down my passenger side window. I thought maybe I had a low tire or left the gas flap open, so I rolled my window down and asked what was up. He said, "Hey there, what's a pretty thing like you doing out late?" I said I just got off work. He asked where I was going. My naive, dumb self said I was heading home. So he says, "Oh, well, I'd like to talk to you for a minute." I said, "No, I don't think so," and he was like, "Aw, why you gotta be so cold?" By this time, I'm hoping the damn light turns green so I can speed off. And I should have just rolled the window up, but I felt like I was going to piss him off if I did so. He said, "I really just want to talk to you for a minute. Just pull over, right over there." And he pointed over across the road to a dark, empty parking lot shrouded with trees. I said, "No, thank you," and rolled up my window at the same time the light finally turned green. As I passed through the intersection, he pulled in behind me, and I believe he started to follow me. I turned left on a residential street, and he turned too. I knew I couldn't drive to the house because then he'd know where I lived. So I made random turns around the neighborhood and left it to get back on the main road. At this point, he was just gone. I'm not sure where he turned or disappeared to, but I drove around for a while until I went home. Honestly, this guy gave me really bad vibes. The audacity of a stranger to ask a young woman to go talk to him in a dark, semi-hidden parking lot late at night to talk about what exactly? Has he tried this before? Has it actually worked for him before? He may have noticed I had an out-of-state license plate and wanted to prey on a visitor. I don't know. My imagination went wild, but I definitely felt my alarm bells ringing. To that guy asking to talk to me in a dark parking lot, I hope we never meet again. I went to the grocery store early one morning. When I was checking out, there was an elderly gentleman in front of me. He was wearing a veteran's hat. he started making casual conversation with me about prices and how, when he was young, like me, the prices were super low. He was much older, so people around him, the cashier and some other gentlemen, helped me bag his groceries. He didn't have much, but it was hard for him to keep his balance. He almost fell at one point, held on to my arm, and apologized to me for doing so. I told him that it was okay and to have a great day. I also didn't have many things, so I began to walk out of the store and eventually caught up to him, as he could not walk very fast. I asked him if he wanted me to walk him to his car, and he told me he has rode his bike because he was forced to turn in his driver's license due to his age. I was impressed that he had rode his bike and asked him where he lived. He told me he lived about 15 minutes, bike distance, away. I asked him if he wanted a ride. He was elderly and didn't seem like a threat, so he accepted. I popped my trunk open so that he could put his bike in. We were struggling when another man who was about to walk into the store saw and came over to help us. He thanked the elderly man for his service and proceeded to go inside. On the way, he asked if we could stop by Carl's Jr. to get a new combo his wife saw on TV and had asked to bring her back one. He called his wife and asked her what the name of the combo was. Once we got to the drive-thru, we ordered and I offered to pay. He thanked me again. On the way to his house, he asked me what I do for a living. I told him I'm a paralegal, and he asked for my number because he was trying to sue the state of California and a detective who was now retired. I gave him my number and then asked him about his potential case. He then proceeded to tell me that he had been in jail in the 70s for a false sexual assault allegation and that the detective working on the case really had it out for him. But working in the legal field, it is not uncommon for me to see these types of situations. When we got to his house, his wife was waiting outside. She was also elderly. She thanked me for giving her husband a ride and seemed excited to have someone there. I had gotten out of the car to get his bike out of my trunk, so she asked me if she could show me their front yard leading all the way up to their backyard. She said her and her husband worked on their home for many years. She seemed very proud of her home. I told them that I had to leave, but that it was so nice to meet them. She insisted. I let them show me around, and when we got to the backyard, they opened the backsliding door and asked if I wanted to come in for some orange juice. I kindly declined. I suddenly got a very weird feeling, but I brushed it off. They told me I could come in and set my purse down if I wanted. My purse is a crossbody bag, so I hadn't even realized I still had it on. Anyway, they insist for me to come in. Mind you, they're super elderly, so I did. They began to show me their wedding photos on the wall. As we're walking through the home, the elderly man shows me all the doors, and the doors have all these crazy type of contraptions, and he says, "Look, so nobody can break out." Mind you, he said, break out, not break in. At this point, my gut was screaming at me to get out. He then said, "Come right this way. I want to show you how we converted this room." My fight or flight response kicked in, and I don't know how I figured it out, but I was able to undo the contraptions from the front door and broke out of there. I ran to my car that was sitting in the driveway and drove away as fast as I could. I went the opposite direction from where my house was, but all I cared about was to get as far away as possible, fast. When I got home, I was shaken. I got several phone calls from him and voicemails asking why I had left so suddenly and if I was okay. I blocked his number and called my cousin to tell her what had happened. Was I almost kidnapped? They were extremely old, but maybe someone else was in the house? Maybe someone much younger and stronger? Something just didn't feel right. Here's a quick little update about the story. They also told me they didn't have any children. When I did some research online, I found out that they do have a daughter and a granddaughter who happens to be a local news reporter here in town. The fact that they lied about that only adds to my suspicions. To that elderly couple, I'm happy that I was able to help you get home, but I hope I never meet you again. My story begins when I was 23. I was traveling to my friend's house for the weekend by coach. We lived in different cities in the UK, which were a fair distance between each other. To give you an idea of the journey, I had to take an early morning coach from a stop near to where I lived into my city's center. Then I headed to her city, about 3 hours or so, where I had a layover, which I waited for a second coach to where my friend lived to get there about lunchtime. When we got into my city, a lot of people got on, and an older guy sat next to me in the aisle seat. We set off, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw and heard him looking at me and saying I was beautiful. I pretended not to hear him, but he tapped me on the shoulder, so I took out my headphones. He repeated that I was beautiful and asked for my name, if I was single, and where I was headed to, which I stupidly told him out of politeness and instantly regretted. He told me his name and some stuff about himself. Let's call him Pete because I can't remember his actual name. A few minutes into the conversation, he started to repeatedly grab my hand while telling me again that I am beautiful, and he wants me to be his girlfriend. I kept on pulling my hand out of his while telling him no. I weirdly noticed during this that his left pinky finger was half missing. During this, there was a different guy on the seat opposite watching us, and I looked at him pleadingly to help me, but he just looked away. Pete then moved on to asking for my number multiple times, to which I kept on saying no again, and that I don't give it out to strangers. He says that we are not strangers, we are friends. Pete then said something with a super creepy smile that stuck with me. I will call you again and again and again, in the day and in the night. I will call you all the time. To try and get out of the situation, I said that I would take his number and call him later when I got off of the coach. It took a while of persuading, but in the end, he gave it to me, along with his name, while he watched me add him to my contacts. He wanted me to ring him right then and there, but I refused. For the last hour and a half of the journey, he finally left me alone. Thank goodness. We finally reached the destination city, and guess who was waiting for me when I got off? Yes, it was Pete. I walked quickly away, and he followed me, asking me where I was going. I ignored him and went into the ladies' toilets to hide there for about 15 to 20 minutes, hoping he'd leave. I started shaking and didn't feel safe, so I sat in the cubicle and locked the door, and also deleted his number. When I came back out, there was Pete, waiting again. I started walking around the coach station in a circle to lose him, but he kept up, asking me where I was going and insisting he'd come along with me. At this point, I had had enough, so I spoke to him quite rudely, telling him I had to get another coach soon to my friends and he cannot come with me. In case he tried anything else, I stayed in a crowded area, put my music back on, and ignored him. He hung around watching me for a bit, but when I looked back up after a while, he had thankfully gone. I was still nervous, looking around should he show up again. On the second coach, I checked all of the people that got on, just in case, by chance, he had remembered where I was going and bought himself a ticket. But luckily, he didn't. The next day on my way back, I was vigilant as well. To that creepy man who kept stalking me on the coach, I hope I never run into you again. Hello, my name is Nikki, but most people call me Nick. My house burnt down on July 11th, so now we are at my grandparents', and it is now December, and this happened like a month ago, but I needed to tell someone. I'm a 13-year-old female and was walking home from school. It was 2:40 p.m., Tuesday, November 14th, also known as World Diabetes Day. But then this van with this very old man started following me as soon as I stopped walking with my boyfriend, who was 14 at the time. So I walked to a store and got a Monster. It's an energy drink. And then I walked home. Let's skip to when I get home, flop on my bed. It has a window that leads to the front of the house, and I normally leave the curtains open. Remember this, as it's important later. I get on call with my boyfriend, and I look out the window because I feel like someone is watching me, but only a van is there. 2 to 3 hours later, my boyfriend comes over to my house, and we are just laying on my bed watching a movie. And I look out the window, and the same man that I saw in the van that was following me was staring right at me. My boyfriend saw me not looking at the movie and looked over and noticed the man staring at me, and he stuck his middle finger up at him and he drove away. I have seen him 2 other times that I remember, but after that, my boyfriend has been walking to and from school with me, and most of the time, he stays the night, because my dad is on a work trip until July 2nd, and my mom gets home at around 11:30 p.m. My grandparents have a different house that they stay at. This is the one they rent out. That is one of the many creepy stories I have. So, to the man that followed me and stalked me in that van, I hope you know I'm 13 years old. I don't know what your intentions are, but I hope I never, ever meet you again. This happened to me last year. I got a receptionist job at a clinic in my city, but the training was at a branch in another city, about 40 minutes away. My boss would call in Uber every day in the morning for me to go and at night for me to come back. The point of departure and arrival was at the clinic in my city. Sometimes I went alone, and other times other girls from other sectors also went with me to the training. The training lasted a month, and as it was through the Uber app, there were 2 different drivers a day. Most of the drivers were calm, so sometimes I would feel comfortable after finishing the trip at the clinic to ask to pay extra for them to bring me home, since I would arrive late at night. The clinic was not close to my house, and it's dangerous out there in the streets. One night, returning to my city, me, another girl, and the Uber driver talked a lot during the trip. I didn't pay too much attention at the moment, but when we arrived at the clinic, I asked if I could pay extra for the ride to my house as usual, and he agreed. The other girl got out, and he ended the trip, which was recorded. From then on, his entire demeanor changed. I think he felt safe doing this, as he had ended the race on the app, so nothing he said would be recorded. While I dictated the way to my house, he released several comments like, "Do you think you've had enough time to decide if it's safe for me to drive you to your house? You don't know me. I've already finished the trip and nobody knows you're still here. What if I'm a psychopath? I have the triple your size. I can pin you down and do whatever I want to you in this car, and you wouldn't even be able to fight back. Can you imagine?" By this time, I was already in panic. I didn't know what to answer, and I could barely tell him the way to my house. After that, he laughed and in my face and said, "But I'm not. And you're very, very lucky that I don't know the city, so I don't know any alley that I could walk into. By the way, where can I get a coffee after taking you home? I'm starving." He would blurt out disturbing comments, then laugh and casually change the subject. It was the most tense trip I've ever had, and when he stopped in front of my house, I was so nervous that I couldn't find the money in my bag, and he still said, "If you don't have any money, there are other ways to pay that I wouldn't mind." I didn't even wait for my change and got out of the car, and to this day I panic when I remember because I know he knows where I live. As soon as I got in the house and was able to think rationally, I realized that I should have asked him to stop the car and run, but I was so terrified by his comments and the tone of his voice that I couldn't even think at the time. To that creepy Uber driver, I hope you know I'll be reporting you, and I definitely never ever want to meet you again. For about 3 months, I've been experiencing hacking from what I assumed to be another tenant in my building. It began with hacking my Bluetooth speaker. I would be listening to something while doing housework, and the next thing I know, my device would be disconnected, and the hacker would start playing very creepy and inappropriate music via my speaker. The main song they would play is "Effed with an Anchor" by L-Storm, a song I had never heard until this. If you choose to listen to the song, you will see why this immediately freaked me out. I would try everything I could do to turn it off, but they would put the volume at full and play it again and again and again. This happened on 2 separate occasions. After this, I stopped using my Bluetooth speaker to prevent this from happening again, until they hacked into my PlayStation and began playing the same song, again on full volume, and continued to play after I tried to press pause or exit my music app. I then unplugged my PlayStation and have not used it since. Finally, yesterday, I had to ask Google a question via my Google Nest device, and straight after, I heard a ding on the device, signaling someone else was controlling it, which is only possible if I grant access. Also, the case with all the devices they have hacked so far. Straight after the ding, the hacker started playing creepy music again, different from the last time. It was an old song with a very creepy undertone, and the only words I remember are, "Times are getting harder, boy." I straight away unplugged my device to stop the music and have stopped using the device altogether. The reason this had freaked me out more than the last few days is the fact I was on the phone with a friend at the time, talking about some personal things I had been going through. Therefore, I believe the hacker is able to hear me. I am unsure whether this is due to them being a direct neighbor of mine or whether they have hacked my devices to listen to me. I'm completely stumped with what to do now, as I've contacted my landlord, and all they said was they'd send out a warning email to all tenants, but I needed to contact my internet provider for further action. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I live in student accommodation, and to make it cheaper, everyone uses the same Wi-Fi, but have separate logins. So the reason it's so easy for them to hack into my devices is due to us using the same Wi-Fi. I then contacted my internet provider, and they said they can't do anything about it. I don't know what to do anymore. I have now had to forfeit use of 3 separate devices to ensure this stops happening, but they continue to find a way to hack me. I feel incredibly unsafe and uneasy in my apartment, becoming paranoid. Someone is listening to me or potentially watching me. I feel as if I'm going crazy. To the people who are hacking me, I hope I find out who you are so I can report you, and I never ever want to meet you again. No one would ever believe me, but I want to share this story because I talked about it yesterday for the first time. I live in Northern Europe. My country is cold and covered by a large forest and several lakes. My family consists of mother, father, and an older brother who is 3 years older than me. He's really important in the story. It's also important to know that my parents' house is in the middle of nowhere. Just forest all around. There aren't even proper roads or any streetlights. The nearest neighbor lives really far away. In my country, winter comes early and lasts longer than summer, so the days are dark almost all year round. My father is a fireman and my mother is a nurse, so they have always been on night shifts. They had left me and my brother home alone since we were just toddlers. I don't know if it's even legal to leave us alone, but my brother has always been good at taking care of me. This particular evening was close to Christmas. Both of us were on winter break, but my brother still went to ice hockey practice. He was really tired that night after practice. Father and mother had gone to work at night and left us alone. I was 8 at the time and my brother was 11. We often slept next to each other downstairs in our parents' bed, but I decided to be a big girl that night and sleep in my own bed upstairs. I really just wanted to play my Nintendo, and I knew my brother wouldn't let me. My brother was so tired after training, and he just wanted to go to sleep. We ate, brushed our teeth, and went to our rooms upstairs. My room faced the forest, and his room faced the only dirt road. There is a hall and a toilet between our rooms. My brother must have fallen asleep right away, but I played and played. I played for so long that I lost track of time. I was under my covers in case my brother came to scold me. I started to hear something outside. However, I didn't pay attention to it at first. I had lived all my life in the middle of the forest. You can hear voices from there all the time. The small noises changed in a second. Someone started shouting, almost screaming. It sounded like a grown man who was wounded. I lifted my head from under the covers, startled, and listened for a moment. I called out my brother's name, but he didn't answer. I got up from my bed and ran to my brother's room. He was asleep, soundly. I started rocking him awake. At the time, I saw from his alarm clock that it was 2 a.m. My brother woke up confused. "Do you hear that?" I asked in a whisper. My brother's eyes widened and all sleep vanished from his eyes. He sprang up. He didn't say anything. He walked towards my room. The shouting came from somewhere in the forest. We stood together in my room and stared out into the darkness. "I think someone needs help," I said quietly, but my brother's expression didn't change. His face was like stone. No, No one needs the help of 2 kids. Besides, if he needed help, he would be screaming for help. My brother turned around. He was right. I heard no words, just screaming. My brother walked downstairs and I ran after him. Our house has 3 doors. He tried each of them to make sure that they were locked. He took our father's headlamp because it had the strongest light. Then he picked up the house phone. It was 2010, so not all the kids had their own phones. He made sure all the lights were off and took my hand. He started to lead us back upstairs. Then he stopped. The shouting had changed. It no longer sounded scared or needy for help. It sounded irritated, almost angry, like it was annoyed that we didn't come out looking for it. My brother squeezed my hand and pulled me upstairs. He stared at my room for a moment before he pulled me into his room with him. He closed the door and sat behind his bed, pulling me into his arms. It was dark everywhere. My brother hadn't turned on the headlamp, but he had 112 ready on the phone. That's our country's emergency number. We sat there in silence. The sound had come closer until it was clearly behind the window of my room. We heard someone banging on my window. I started to sob. My brother stroked my head to calm me down, but it didn't help. I was so scared. The sound seemed to be coming closer and closer. It had climbed the fire escape under my window and was now traveling along the rain gutters towards my brother's window. Then it became quiet. It stopped screaming, but we could hear it clinging to the rain gutters to get closer to us. Then it was too quiet. My brother turned on the headlamp and pointed the light towards the window. Nothing. He turned off the headlamp and waited a moment. Then he pointed the light at the window again. Nothing. He turned it off and waited. He pointed the light at the window. Nothing. He turned it off. Then there was a big crash, as if a big pile of snow had dropped from the rooftop down to the terrace. My brother flashed the light in the window. There was something on it. The kind of trace that is left when you breathe too close to the glass in cold weather. There was a trace of mist on it. My brother immediately turned off the light. Whatever it was, it had fallen down because my brother's window has nothing to hold on to. We started hearing moaning. It sounded only partially human anymore. It sounded more like a bear. If you've ever heard the sound of a bear when it's been shot, that is what it sounded like. But it had a touch of a man. Then the voice became angry again. It threw a full tantrum. It started hitting the wall of the house. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my head against my brother's shirt. It raged for a while, but started to whine and moan again. It no longer sounded human at all. I can't describe what it was like, but it didn't sound natural. My brother dropped the headlamp on the floor and hugged me tightly. We listened to the sound for quite a long time. I don't remember at what point I fell asleep, and I woke up in the morning. The beautiful morning sun reflected against the white snow. I was laying in my brother's bed, and he was sitting next to me reading comics. He smiled. Had I been dreaming? I didn't have time to say anything when we heard the lock on the front door open. It was 9 o'clock. Dad had come home. My brother cheerfully jumped out of bed and ran to greet Dad downstairs. Maybe I did have a nightmare and went to sleep next to my brother. It doesn't sound impossible, especially since my brother didn't mention it in the morning. I convinced myself that I had really seen a nightmare that felt real. I believed so for many, many years. However, that changed. My brother came to visit me yesterday. Nowadays, I live in the capital of my country, far from my mother and father, because I go to university. My brother broke up with his longtime girlfriend, and I promised that he could bunk in my place as long as he needed. We had a lot of fun, just like old times. We drank some wine and watched a movie, and just talked about everything. Then, we started talking about a little deeper things, which usually happens after drinking wine. I turned to look out my window. Winter was coming, and it was already dark. It brought back childhood memories. I told him about a dream I had when I was little, while looking at the street lamps outside. This darkness reminds me of when I had a nightmare as a child. I dreamed that someone screamed behind my window and I hid in your room with you. Wasn't I a strange girl? I laughed and turned to look at my brother. My brother is now 23. He is huge. He is into bodybuilding and has a blonde beard. He looks a bit like a Viking, but I've never seen a look on him like that as an adult. He looked at me with big eyes. He was pale, like he had seen a ghost. I freaked out a little. What? I said awkwardly. You remember that? He asked. It got really quiet. What do you mean? Wasn't it a dream? I was so confused. My brother looked really startled, as if I had digged up a memory from his mind that he wanted to forget. Answer me. I thought I had a nightmare. I was startled too. My brother shook his head. I thought you wouldn't remember that. You were so little. I hoped you would have forgotten. My brother looked at me blankly and told me his side of the story. He told me how I had fallen asleep in his arms from exhaustion. He pushed me to his bed, but didn't fall asleep himself. He sat at my side all night like a guard dog. The morning had begun to dawn. The sound began to fade until it just disappeared. My brother still couldn't sleep. He decided to start reading comics to pass the time. In the morning, when Father had come home, my brother had gone out to look for tracks. But since it had snowed all night and morning, all the tracks were covered. For the next week, my brother visited my room several times a night to make sure I was sleeping safely. We started talking more about what happened. Neither of us ever mentioned what happened to anyone. I asked him why he didn't call 112, but he just shook his head. Who would have believed me? He was right. It would have sounded like a prank invented by little boys. My brother also said he was annoyed that he didn't flash the light to the window sooner. He would have wanted to see what the creature looked like. I was just happy that I hadn't seen anything. I'm also happy to know I'm not crazy and it wasn't a dream. I have a witness. My brother experienced it too, and he remembers it better than I do. No one else has to believe me. No one else would believe me. Of course, it's also possible that somehow we created the whole thing in our heads. We have no physical evidence of what happened, and it happened years ago. It's very possible that we were just kids with overactive imaginations. I'm certainly not denying that possibility. However, I'm interested to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. And if you have, did you see it? That creature? And if you did, what did it look like? As curious as I remain, I hope to never run into whatever that was ever again. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I can't really make sense of this situation, even now. This happened this past Saturday, and I'm only just now feeling comfortable enough to talk about it. I spent the night out with my older sister and a couple of her friends. All we really did was go out to eat and then took a walk in the city, nothing crazy. Some of the party of people had to leave for one reason or another, so I decided to call it a night. I had texted one of my guy friends and asked if he wanted to come over and watch a movie with me, to which he said yes. We went our separate ways. I met up with my friend outside of my apartment. To add a little context, my apartment is a one single building with a backyard space that's shared with two other similar styled apartments. That may be important in a bit. When I pulled up, there was a car that parked across the street. I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was there for one of the neighbors. I went in and changed while my friend scrolled Netflix for a movie to watch. As I'm leaving the bedroom, I hear a knock at the door. I'll admit, this next part was incredibly stupid on my behalf. My area doesn't have many issues, so I got complacent. I opened the door to see a guy standing there. I'm a measly 5'6", and he was at least a head taller than me. He didn't look anything out of the ordinary, though. Mid to late 20s, brown hair, fully groomed beard, moderately dressed. He asked where my sister was. I told her that I didn't have a sister. That was a lie. He then asked for her by name. I told him again that he was mistaken. Not only did he address her by name and ask for her again, but he mentioned that he followed her from the place we had just left, and he just wanted to see her. Absolutely not. Nothing about that set right with me. I started to close the door, but he walked up and physically prevented me from doing so. Mama didn't raise no punk, so I planted my hands into his chest and pushed him back, which achieved nothing at all. He then started calling her name very loudly and continued trying to make his way past me. I yelled at him to leave and stood my ground the best that I could. He ended up shoving me aside, but before he could get past me, my friend pushed him against the wall and hit him in the face. After that, he booked it out of the door and into the parked car across the street. My friend pulled the door closed, locked it, then helped me up and moved me into the bathroom while he went to make sure the guy left. I called the police and filed a report. Also, and this is the stupidity I mentioned earlier, I have a Ring doorbell camera. I should have just gauged him from inside the house and not opened the door. Carelessness got the better of me in that instant, and I'm still kicking myself over it. That could have ended a lot worse. I showed my sister his picture, and she had no recollection of who he was, though she said he looked somewhat familiar. The other theory that I have as to why he followed me is the fact that I accidentally left that night while wearing my sister's jacket. So, my divided thoughts. 1, she somehow developed a stalker that mistook me for her when I was leaving. She's a hairstylist and part-time waitress, so this could easily bring people into her presence that she couldn't remember. 2, she may know who it is, but doesn't want to say anything. Don't know why this crosses my mind. Paranoia, maybe. To the guy that tried to break into my house, I really hope you're in jail, and that I never ever meet you again. And that, my dear Embers, is the end of these true Let's Not Meet stories. I hope that you are resting well and slumberland has you embraced in all of its comfort. Until then, I'll read to you soon. Good night.